As debates around free speech pulse through college campuses, as we saw, the next presidential election in the United States could be about the survival of democracy itself. But how did we get to this point where illiberalism so seriously threatens what was once the global role model of a republic? Robert Kagan is a longtime policy expert who worked in the Reagan administration during the 1980s. His new book, Rebellion, examines the roots of this current crisis and what might come next. And he's joining us now from New York, in fact. Welcome to the programme. What I'd like to do is read the rest of the title, Rebellion, How Anti-Liberalism is Tearing America Apart Again. Robert Kagan, just briefly tell me what you mean by that.
Well, the founders created a government, which we've been living with, based on the principles of the Declaration of Independence, which are fundamentally liberal principles. They're about individual rights. They're about human equality. They're about the universality of individual rights. And it's been true that since the founding, there has always been a significant resistance to those principles. Obviously, in the early years by slaveholders, later by the Jim Crow South, often by religious groups that feel that they're losing their position, particularly white Christians who feel that they're losing their position in society. And they have, in the case of the Civil War, fought an actual rebellion. We thought all this had gone away. But as we see today, there is once again, these forces have risen. They've captured the Republican Party. And what they want is a change of regime, as they call it, the regime. And the regime they want changed is the system that the founders established with the Constitution and after the Revolution.
I want to ask you, because you have said, and we've quoted you as saying, that this next election could be the last. You've basically said, you know, America is one election away from becoming reality, this idea of overthrowing American democracy. And to the alarmists who might say, oh, Bob, there you go again, are you really, really want people to believe that the strongest democracy in the world is in threat of being overthrown? And by whom? Who are these people? Are they strong enough other than, to be flagrantly disregarding? But nonetheless, even 4 years of Trump, the Republic held.
Well, it held just barely by a thread. I mean, if it had not been for Mike Pence, we don't know if it would have held. I think it's worth remembering that Donald Trump has already tried to become a dictator. When he attempted to annul a free and fair election and declare himself the victor, if he had succeeded, he would have been ruling as a dictator, not as an elected official. And so the question arises, how could you possibly put someone like that back in office? And I think it's important to understand that the core of his support, the really white-hot core of the Trump movement, does want to see this system overthrown. They do want a different form of government. Some of them want a Christian nation, which is also contrary to what the founders established. Some of them want a white nation, a nation where whites enjoy the privileges that they had enjoyed in the past. Many people want to turn the clock back. And I think we just have to recognize that. It's not so shocking when you look at the entirety of American history. These groups have always existed. What's happened now is they've taken control of the Republican Party, and they have someone as their leader who is willing to destroy the system. That's what he is. He's a wrecker.
Just for people who may not think the way you think, in court, and you must be watching this very carefully, the current court case, his defense is that, in fact, I was not trying to overthrow the system. Everything I did was to ensure the integrity of the election. I mean, that's the heart of the immunity case in the Supreme Court.
It's absurd on the face of it, and we already know how untrue that is. Is it helping the election, the integrity of the election, to ask a governor of Georgia to find me some more votes? Does it help the election integrity to create phony electoral slates in the various different states? It's very clear what Trump tried to do, and he could say anything he wants. The question is, why should anyone believe him unless they're so deeply committed to what he's trying to accomplish, which is essentially to change the system, to wreak vengeance on those that he's angry at? They're all down with that, and that's why they buy this nonsense that he spills.
Okay, then why is it? Let's just say they're the MAGA heart of his supporters. But then there are others who are not necessarily MAGA, but they happen to be Republicans. People like, Bill Barr, who was Attorney General and who also didn't go along with the effort to overturn the election. And yet, he has now said that he would vote for the Republican ticket, i.e. Donald Trump. I'm going to play you a little interchange he had with CNN's Caitlin Collins a few days ago.
You're voting for someone who you believe tried to subvert the peaceful transfer of power, that can't even achieve his own policies, that lied about the election even after his attorney general told him that the election wasn't stolen. And as the former chief law enforcement in this country, you're going to vote for someone who is facing 88 criminal counts.
Well, look, the 88 criminal counts, a lot of those are, and I've said...
Even if 10 of them are accurate.
The answer to the question is yes. I'm supporting the Republican ticket.
I mean, it is astounding. And how do you account for that? Is it just basic party politics that Republicans will, these Republicans will vote for Republican no matter who it is? Or do you think he's amongst the destroyers?
No, he's a coward. In his case, it's just cowardice. He wants to be able to survive in a Trump term after all the horrible things that he's said about Donald Trump. He's basically trying to find his way back into the good graces. He's afraid that Donald Trump may win, and he's probably worried about the consequences to him. But it's impossible to believe that he believes the things that he says. What he's trying to do is rationalize what essentially is him folding to Donald Trump. And I think that's true of a massive number of sort of professional Republicans, people who, have had jobs in the past, would like to have jobs in the future, would like to make money off of being a good Republican in the future. The larger question is, why are all sort of people we used to think of as average Republicans being willing to support someone who has demonstrated his willingness to become a dictator? And the answer there, I think, is mostly that they just don't care that much. And this is something that I discuss in my book, something that Thomas Jefferson worried about, something that Abraham Lincoln talked about in his famous Lyceum speech in 1838. Americans have lost the fundamental love of liberty, the fundamental virtues that are required in our system. It is not enough to only want freedom and liberty for yourself. In our system, you have to want it for everyone. And if you don't have that sort of sense of liberal virtue, the belief in these universal values, then you're willing to allow someone who is going to destroy them to take power.
So let's just talk about these fundamental American values. And freedom of speech is one of them, freedom of expression. And of course, all of that is being demonstrated and tested on American campuses right now because of the war we were just discussing earlier, Israel's war in Gaza. Do you see, as some have written, in fact, a Columbia professor, history professor, that it was inevitable that this heavy-handed response that has caused it to go even further out of control, calling the police onto campus, National Guard in some states, was going to lead to the current situation? Because I just wonder whether you connect that with the illiberalism, because we saw over the years Republicans, even those running for president, like the governor of Florida, criticizing so-called liberal, and they would add woke, elite universities, banning books from schools. All those kinds of things have been going on for a while.
Right, and now they want to use these protests as sort of item A in the general view that Republicans and Donald Trump in particular are trying to sell, that the left has taken over, that they're destroying our country, that we're in chaos. And I think that regardless of what you may feel, what anyone may feel about the protests and the subject matter of the protests or the way they're being conducted, the one thing that we can all be confident of is that the American system of government is not threatened by students protesting on campuses. We will survive students protesting on campuses, but where the real threat comes from is having someone who has already demonstrated his dictatorial tendencies be given power again in a circumstance where there will be no one to stop him, not the Supreme Court, as we've seen, not if it's a Republican-controlled Congress, if we've seen. That's what we should be worried about. We can spend all our time talking about student protests, but it's a real favor to Donald Trump that that's what we're talking about today and not the threat that he poses to this nation.